Noah needed space. But what he really needed wasn't distance in the way people usually meant it. It wasn't silence. It wasn't avoidance. It was time away from Tate long enough to figure out what anything between them actually required from him. Because for the first time in years, Noah wasn't sure if the boundaries he had started forming were clarity, or just another reaction to being overwhelmed. He stood in the middle of his dorm room long after Tate had left, the door still faintly vibrating from the closing sound, as if the building itself hadn't fully settled yet. Noah didn't move right away. He just let the quiet take shape around him. Not empty quiet. Charged quiet. The kind that still carried everything that had just happened inside it. Eventually he walked to his bed and sat down slowly, elbows resting on his knees. His eyes drifted to the floor. To nothing. To everything. Because his mind wasn't empty. It was replaying. Tate's voice at the end of the argument. Not the anger. Not the confusion. But the explanation. The part where Tate finally stopped performing certainty and started speaking like someone trying to translate something he had never been taught how to say. I was lonely. I didn't know how to define people without losing them. I didn't know how to keep you without feeling like you would disappear. Noah closed his eyes. At the time, he had heard those words as an explanation for behavior that had hurt him for years. Now alone in his dorm room, they echoed differently. Not softer. Just more complicated. Because if Tate had been acting from fear instead of intention, then everything Noah had been trying to define for years had been built on something unstable from the start. Noah leaned back against the bed frame, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the boundaries he had tried to create. Simple in theory. Hard in practice. No expectations of romance. No blurred physical closeness that mimics something deeper. No letting Tate dictate emotional priority. No letting history override present needs. No allowing confusion to replace communication. He had thought those rules would give him clarity. But now, after hearing Tate's explanation, Noah wasn't sure they still made sense. Because boundaries were supposed to protect him. But what if the thing he was protecting himself from wasn't just Tate, but the entire emotional structure they had built together over 14 years? Noah exhaled slowly. The realization sat heavily in his chest. He wasn't just deciding how to respond to Tate. He was deciding how to reinterpret an entire history. Every sleepover. Every argument. Every moment of closeness that had never been defined but never truly been casual either. And the hardest part was this. Tate had not just explained his behavior. He had exposed the emotional logic behind it. Fear of abandonment. Fear of definition. Fear of losing the only consistent person in his life. Noah opened his eyes again. The room felt sharper now. More real. And somehow more uncertain than before. Because understanding Tate didn't simplify anything. It expanded the problem. Noah leaned forward again, resting his forearms on his thighs. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with this, he said quietly to himself. Because part of him still needed distance. Still needed separation to think clearly. Still needed space to feel like he existed outside of Tate's gravity. But another part of him, one he didn't fully trust yet, was beginning to question whether distance alone would actually give him answers. Or just more time to second-guess everything he thought he knew. He looked toward the door. Tate had been on the other side of it not long ago. Leaving. Apologizing. Asking not to be hated. And beneath everything else, asking not to be alone. Noah felt his jaw tighten slightly. This was the part no one explained in books. Not the ending of relationships. But the moment right after clarity starts to fracture. When you realize that understanding someone doesn't automatically tell you what to do with them. Noah lay back on the bed fully this time, arms spread slightly as if trying to ground himself in the physical space of the room. I need time, he whispered. But even as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure what time was meant to solve anymore. Because the problem wasn't just distance. It was history. And history didn't stop existing just because someone stepped away from it. Outside, the campus continued moving as if nothing had changed. But inside Noah's room, everything had shifted. And for the first time since meeting Tate, Noah wasn't asking whether he was enough. He was asking something far more difficult. What do you do with someone you finally understand, when understanding them doesn't make leaving them any easier? Tate looked up hopefully, but Noah continued. I think you're finally telling me the truth, Tate. The hope lingered for only a moment. But the truth doesn't erase 14 years. Tate lowered his gaze again. I know. No. Noah gently corrected him. I don't think you do. His voice remained calm. You've spent 14 years afraid people would leave. I've spent 14 years wondering why I wasn't worth claiming. He let those words settle between them. We were both lonely. We were both scared. We just happened to be scared of completely different things. Noah wiped another tear from his face. I don't hate you anymore. Tate's shoulders relaxed slightly. But I'm still grieving. He looked around the room. I'm grieving the relationship I thought we had. I'm grieving the future I imagined. I'm grieving 14 years of hoping that one day your words and your actions would finally make sense together. He met Tate's eyes once more. I understand you now. His voice was gentle. But understanding you isn't the same as being healed. For the first time that evening, Tate just nodded instead of interrupting. He simply nodded. That silent acknowledgement meant more to Noah than any apology ever had. I'm not forgiving you today, Noah said quietly, maybe in a few weeks. He took a slow breath. Maybe we could meet then at that cafe near campus and talk. His voice was calm, measured. I'll call you when I'm ready and we can set something up. Tate immediately shook his head. I don't want to wait that long. The desperation in his voice caught Noah off guard. I've tried sleeping next to other people. He looked down ashamed. It was still cold. It was still lonely. Because you weren't there. He pressed a hand against his chest. The bed feels cold without you. You warm up everything just by being there. I know it's not your job, but I'm glad you're there. When I was a kid, I nicknamed you Noe or Sunbeam. His eyes met Noah's. You make me happy. You satisfy something in me that nobody else ever has. A sad smile flickered across his face. Maybe that's selfish. He shrugged helplessly. But I'd like it to stay that way for the rest of my life. He laughed softly through his tears. Or, at least until you meet a nice girl who will steal you away from me. The room fell silent. The only thing I asked, Tate said, his voice trembling, is that if you ever met a girl you really liked, before you decided to leave, let me see if I could give you a better offer. He let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. I know you'd never choose me, Noah, not when there's a girl involved, but, at least lie to me, tell me you'd give me a chance. Noah looked at him for a long moment, his expression softening with sympathy. I can't lie to you, Tate. Tate's face fell. No matter how much I care about you, I don't want you to hold onto a promise I know I can't keep. Noah stared at Tate for several long seconds. A month earlier, those words would have given him exactly what he had spent years craving. They would have fed every hope that Tate loved him in the same way Noah had loved Tate. Now they have only left him with another ache. Noah slowly shook his head. Do you hear yourself? Tate frowned. You keep talking about not losing me. Noah's voice wasn't angry. It was weary. You talk about cold beds. About loneliness. About being happy when I'm around. You tell me you want me beside you for the rest of your life. He paused. And then you end it by imagining some nice girl taking me away. A bittersweet smile crossed Noah's face. You still don't understand. Tate's expression fell. I'm not waiting for a girl, Tate. Noah's voice softened. I'm maintaining my peace. I'm waiting until I can think about you without feeling like my heart has been pulled in too. He swallowed. I need time to become someone who isn't emotionally dependent on whether you're standing next to me. A tear rolled down Noah's cheek. And I think. He hesitated. I think you need to become someone who can sleep through the night without believing your happiness depends on whether I'm in the bed beside you. Tate looked as though the words had physically struck him. Noah stepped closer, close enough that they could see the tears in each other's eyes. I believe you when you say the bed feels cold. I believe you when you say you're lonely. I believe you when you say I make you happy. His voice cracked. But Tate, it can't be my job to fix your loneliness. It can't be my responsibility to make you whole, if I become the only reason you're okay. He gently shook his head. Then neither of us is free to be who we are. Tate's shoulders sagged. Noah reached out instinctively, then stopped himself before his hand made contact. The hesitation hurt them both. I still care about you, Noah whispered. I care enough that I don't want us to keep hurting each other. He managed a faint, sad smile. So let me miss you, let yourself miss me, and if, in a few weeks, we still want to be in each other's lives. He nodded toward the window, where the campus lights glowed in the distance. Meet me at that cafe. For the first time in 14 years, let's meet each other as two people who chose to be there. He held Tate's gaze. Not because we're afraid of being alone, but because we genuinely want to see one another. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Noah quietly added the words he hoped Tate would remember. If what we have is strong enough, it will survive a few weeks apart. Noah. Tate hesitated in the doorway like he was trying to force his body to obey a decision his mind didn't fully agree with. I'm not going to promise I won't come into your dorm while you're asleep. He gave a small, almost helpless shake of his head. I might end up outside your door anyway, sitting there, sleeping against it, I don't know. A faint, strained laugh escaped him, but it didn't carry any real humor. No, I can't stay away. Noah exhaled sharply through his nose at that, a tired, almost disbelieving sound. There he is, Noah muttered. Tate looked up at him. The same problem. Tate's mouth twitched like he almost smiled but couldn't fully manage it. Yeah, he said softly, Pepe Le Pew strikes again. The attempt at humor faded quickly, his shoulders sagged. But I'll try, he added more seriously, I'll try to give you space. He pointed weakly between them, as if trying to draw an invisible line in the air. Just don't strangle yourself with it, okay? Noah didn't respond immediately, his expression softened despite everything. I heard you, he said quietly. Tate nodded like that helped even a little. He climbed out of the bed and started getting dressed with slow, distracted movements, shirt on, buttons misaligned at first then corrected, like his hands were working separately from his thoughts. I'm sorry, Tate said suddenly. Noah glanced at him. I came here trying to apologize, Tate continued, voice rougher now, more unsteady, and now your coffee is cold. He picked up the cup from the nightstand like it was evidence of failure. I keep doing that, he added quietly, fixing nothing, making things worse. Noah's gaze dropped for a second, then returned. It's just coffee, he said, but his voice lacked bite. Tate let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, except it broke halfway through. I'll miss you. That one landed heavier than anything else. Noah didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly like he was trying to hold his reaction in place. I know, he said finally, softer than before. Tate nodded once, as if accepting that there wasn't anything more to say that wouldn't make it worse. He turned toward the door. Then paused. His hand stayed on the doorknob, unmoving. For a long moment he didn't open it. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before. Don't hate me. Noah blinked, something in his expression shifting. There are already enough people around here who hate me. A small, broken laugh followed, like Tate was trying to turn it into a joke and failing halfway. Don't be one of them. The words hung there raw and exposed. Noah stared at him for a moment, the anger that had been so sharp earlier now dulled into something heavier and more complicated. I don't hate you, Noah said. Tate didn't move. Noah exhaled slowly. I've been angry, he admitted. I've been hurt, I've been exhausted. A pause. But I don't hate you. His voice dropped slightly. I don't think I ever really did. That seemed to land harder on Tate than rejection would have. His shoulders lowered, tension slipping out of him in a way that looked almost painful. Noah watched him carefully. And that's part of the problem, Noah added quietly. Tate gave a faint, broken smile at that, like he understood exactly what Noah meant without needing it explained. Yeah, he murmured. Silence followed. Not comfortable. Not resolved. Just real. Tate finally opened the door. But before stepping out, he looked back one last time. Not confident, not composed. Just 18, tired and scared of being left behind. Noah's chest tightened at the sight of him. Tate held his gaze for a second too long. Then he forced a small nod. And left. The door clicked shut. Noah stood still. Then she slowly sat back down on the edge of the bed, staring at the space where Tate had been. The cold coffee sat untouched on the nightstand between them like a reminder of everything that had been said but not solved. Noah exhaled shakily. "I don't hate you," he whispered to the empty room again as if Tate might still hear it. But what he didn't say out loud was the part that hurt most. Not knowing whether love, whatever it had been, was enough to fix any of this. It took about a week of sleeping in his new dorm room before Noah finally grew accustomed to the silence. For the first few nights, the bed felt impossibly large. He would wake in the middle of the night, instinctively expecting to feel Tate's weight draped across him, an arm wrapped around his waist, or a sleepy complaint about the room being too cold. Instead, there was nothing but cool sheets and the faint hum of the air conditioner. He missed Tate's presence more than he cared to admit. 14 years of sharing the same room, the same late-night conversations, and the same routines couldn't simply disappear overnight. But missing Tate wasn't the same as regretting his decision. Time away from him was necessary. By the second week, however, Noah noticed something strange. People were whispering. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia. College campuses were full of gossip and freshmen were always looking around at everyone else. But the whispers kept following him. When Noah walked into the library, conversations abruptly stopped. Small groups of students glanced at him before leaning closer together, speaking in hushed voices while stealing quick looks in his direction. A blonde girl nudged her friend. "That's him," she whispered. Both of them looked at Noah before quickly pretending to study. At the recreation center, two guys paused in the middle of a basketball game as he walked past. "Seriously? I told you that's him." They both turned to look. Noah frowned but kept walking. In the dining hall, it was worse. Students sitting several tables away openly stared before bending toward one another to whisper. Every so often, someone would glance at Noah with curiosity, pity, or disbelief. He caught fragments as he passed. "That's the guy. I can't believe. Did you see?" But never enough to understand what they were talking about. Even in class, it continued. As he took his usual seat, the students behind him lowered their voices. One of them quietly asked, "Is that really him?" "I think so." Another replied, "Poor guy." "Poor guy." Noah looked over his shoulder. The three students immediately looked away, pretending to organize their notebooks. His stomach tightened. By the end of the week, the feeling had become impossible to ignore. Wherever he went, outside on a bench between classes, walking across campus, waiting in line for coffee, sitting beneath the shade of an oak tree with a textbook in his lap, someone was looking at him. Someone was whispering. The unsettling part wasn't that people recognized him. It was that he had never met any of them. Noah wasn't popular. He wasn't an athlete, a student leader, or someone who had created a scandal. He had spent his first 2 weeks quietly attending class, studying, and keeping to himself. Yet somehow, strangers seemed to know exactly who he was. As he stood to leave the student union one afternoon, he caught another pair of students staring before one quickly lowered their phone. Noah's pulse quickened. For the first time since arriving on campus, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. He just had no idea. By the third week, the whispers had grown teeth. It wasn't subtle anymore, not just the quick glances that darted away when he looked back, not just the hush that fell too fast when he entered a room. Now it came with laughter. Girls giggling behind their hands, voices bright and careless, tossing his name around like it meant something entertaining. "Lucky," someone said once, loud enough that he caught it clearly. "How did he manage that?" another voice followed, half laughing. "There's more to that boy than meets the eye," someone else added, like it was a joke they all understood, but he didn't. Noah heard enough of it to feel it settle under his skin. It followed him between buildings, through hallways, even into the quiet corners where he tried to disappear. And the worst part was how quickly it turned the world around him into something performative, like his life wasn't his anymore, just something being watched, interpreted, talked about. So he started disappearing on purpose. That was how he ended up outside, standing near the chapel. The air there was different, quieter, older somehow, like even sound behaved more carefully. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at nothing in particular, trying to breathe without feeling like every inhale came with commentary attached. He had gone to the rectory earlier just to get away from it all, away from the eyes, away from the noise that seemed to cling to him no matter where he went. He didn't hear them approach at first. "Hey!" Noah turned slightly. Susie, Jack, Andrew, Bree, and Anna were there, his friends from Brown, all of them catching up to him like they'd been looking for him for a while. Their presence shifted something in the air immediately, grounding him a little, pulling him back toward something familiar. Susie tilted her head, studying him. "We've been trying to find you, you okay?" Noah almost laughed at the question, but it came out more like a breath. "Yeah," he said automatically, then corrected himself under his breath. "No, not really." Jack frowned, glancing toward the main buildings as he could already guess. "It's gotten worse, hasn't it?" Noah didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted back toward the chapel steps where the noise from campus felt distant but not gone. "Yeah," he admitted finally, "it's a lot." Bree shifted closer, lowering her voice. "They don't even know anything, they're just making stuff up because they're bored." Anna gave a small, frustrated laugh. People always do that when they think someone's life looks more interesting than theirs. Noah's mouth tightened slightly at that, but he didn't respond. Andrew stepped closer too, quieter than the rest. "You don't have to take it alone, you know." That landed differently. Because that was the thing, he had been taking it alone, even when people were technically around. Even when Tate was there, even when the bed was warm and the nights were close and complicated. Noah looked down for a moment, then back up at them. "I just needed it to stop," he said simply, "even for a minute." Susie nodded once like she understood more than she said. "Then stay here for a bit, let it quiet down." And for the first time all week, Noah didn't immediately feel like he had to move somewhere else. Noah shook his head slowly, frustration tightening his jaw. "Does anyone actually know why people are whispering about me?" he asked, voice lower now, sharper around the edges. "Because it's driving me crazy." For a moment, there was only the soft, ambient noise of campus around them, the distant chatter, the rustle of leaves, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere far off. Jack frowned. "I don't think it's anything real, people just latch onto things and run with them." Andrew shrugged. "Yeah, it's Brown, or, well, whatever this place is trying to be, gossip spreads fast." Bree looked genuinely confused. "I haven't heard anything specific, just noise." Anna shook her head too. "Nothing solid, just people being weird." Noah exhaled through his nose like that answer didn't help at all. If anything, it made it worse, because nothing being real meant it could be anything, or everything, or nothing at all and still somehow ruin his entire day. He looked toward Susie, the only one who hadn't answered yet. Susie was leaning back slightly, eating pudding like she had all the time in the world, completely unbothered by the tension hanging in the air. She glanced at him over the rim of her cup, then gave a small, knowing smirk. "Are you seeing anyone?" she asked casually. The question landed so out of nowhere that it cut through everything else. Noah blinked once. "What?" Susie's expression didn't change much, just that faint, amused curve at the corner of her mouth. "Because," she continued before anyone could interrupt her, "that would explain a lot of the energy floating around you lately." And then she burst out laughing, as she just said something far funnier than the situation actually warranted. Jack groaned immediately. "Susie, seriously." Bree stared at her. "That's your conclusion?" Anna crossed her arms, half amused, half exasperated. "That is not helpful." But Susie just kept laughing for another second before finally waving a hand like she was surrendering. "I'm just saying," she added between breaths, "people don't usually act this obsessed unless there's something going on." Noah didn't laugh. He just stood there, the question hanging in the air now in a completely different shape than before, less like a joke, and more like something everyone was pretending not to examine too closely. Susie took another slow spoonful of her chocolate pudding, completely unbothered by the shift in everyone else's expressions. "Do you have any nightly guests or lovers you haven't told us about?" she asked, tone almost light, like she was asking about the weather. Then she broke into laughter again, sharp, uncontrollable, as the idea itself amused her too much. Noah blinked at her. "Of course not." The words came out immediately, instinctively, final. Susie stopped laughing just long enough to look at him properly this time, not teasing now, something more observant, almost skeptical, like she was checking whether he actually believed what he was saying. The others, meanwhile, exchanged confused glances. Jack frowned. "What are you even talking about?" Bree tilted her head. "Yeah, what nightly guests?" Anna looked between Susie and Noah. "Susie, you're not making sense." Susie sighed dramatically, as if she'd been waiting for someone to catch up. She set her spoon down and leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. "Really," she said, slower now, "you don't know that you have a Romeo outside your bedroom door sleeping against your dorm room." The words landed wrong, too specific to be a joke. Noah went still. Susie watched him for a second, then continued, matter of fact now, like she was laying out something she assumed everyone already knew. "It's been going on for at least 2 weeks," she said. "First, I thought it was a drug dealer or someone trying to find a safe, quiet place to crash, but it's been every night." A pause. Her eye stayed on Noah's face. "You honestly had no clue?" she asked again, quieter this time, the humor fading at the edges. Noah didn't answer right away. Because suddenly, things that hadn't fully made sense were lining up in a way he didn't want them to. Late nights, empty bed, quiet absences that didn't match the explanation he'd been given or the one he'd assumed was true. And somewhere behind that realization was something heavier. Something familiar. Something that didn't feel like gossip anymore. Noah shook his head slowly, still trying to keep the conversation grounded even as something in Susie's tone made his stomach feel slightly off balance. "What did he look like?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. Susie didn't even hesitate. She took another spoonful of her chocolate pudding, completely unbothered, like she was describing a movie character instead of a real person she'd apparently been seeing outside his dorm. "Suspicious," she said first, like that was the most important detail, then she shrugged. "Black hair, about 6 feet, sexy as hell, his dick is 9 inches from what I imagine beneath his expensive jeans, very attractive, like, distractingly attractive." She leaned back slightly, smirking now. "Honestly, so attractive I'd climb on top of him if he were single." Anna made a noise of disbelief. "Susie." But Susie kept going, grinning wider now. "God, he looks like Superman, he's beautiful and insufferably rich. I got wet down there just looking at him outside your door 2 nights ago." Noah didn't laugh. His expression barely changed at first, but something in his eyes tightened, focus sharpening, as his brain had latched onto a detail it didn't like. Susie glanced at him, still amused. "Do you know him?" she asked. Then, without missing a beat, "And if you do, can you hook me up with him, like yesterday?" The others were reacting around her now, confused, uneasy, trying to figure out what exactly she was getting at, but Noah wasn't listening to them anymore. Because the description wasn't just vague. It was specific. Too specific. Black hair, 6 feet. The way Susie said he stood as if he belonged there even when he clearly didn't. The word Superman stuck oddly in Noah's mind because it wasn't just appearance she was describing. It was present, stillness, familiarity. Noah's grip tightened slightly at his side. A memory surfaced uninvited, nights where he left his room and felt like something was off, even if he couldn't name it. The way the hallway sometimes felt occupied even when it was empty. The strange sense that his life had been continuing just outside his awareness. His voice came quieter this time. "Where exactly have you been seeing him?" Susie looked more than happy to explain, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask in detail. "I was on your floor," she said, settling back into the story, still eating her pudding like it was the most casual thing in the world. "Returning a couple of textbooks to a girl I know from econ class when I saw this, sex god." She paused just long enough for everyone to react, then grinned again. "God, he was beautiful, just lying there against your door." Noah's expression shifted slightly at that, subtle but noticeable. His attention was locked in. Susie continued, gesturing loosely with her spoon. I took a closer look. I've never seen him before. I was literally standing right above him looking down, but he was so asleep I don't think he even noticed. A small laugh slipped out of her. He looked cold, but he didn't seem to care. Her eyes flicked to Noah again, curiosity sharpening. He was devastatingly handsome, she added, like that was a necessary scientific conclusion. Then lighter again, do you know who he is? Because I need a boyfriend like right now. That did it. Something in Noah's face finally softened into recognition. A quiet, almost reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It must be Tate, he said, more to himself than anyone else. The room shifted instantly. Everyone reacted at once. You don't mean that, Tate? Susie said, straightening slightly. Tate Blue. Noah nodded once. My childhood buddy. The name seemed to land heavier than expected. Even Susie's teasing expression faltered for a second as she processed it. The richest boy on campus? She asked, slower now, as if recalibrating everything she thought she knew. I've heard stories about him, Jack muttered. Wait, he's here, like here. Susie leaned forward again, suddenly more animated but with a different energy now, less joking, more incredulous. He was supposed to go to Princeton, wasn't he? Noah didn't answer immediately, but someone else did, Andrew, almost automatically. Yeah, that family's everywhere there, donations, buildings, scholarships. Susie nodded quickly. Exactly, my brother's at Princeton on scholarship and their name is all over that campus, like everywhere. A pause. Then she looked back at Noah again, realization fully forming now in her expression. So, you're telling me, she said slowly, that Tate Blue has been sleeping outside your door every night and you didn't know. And for the first time, the humor was completely gone. Noah spoke before he really thought about it. He told me he might sleep out there, he said, then immediately paused, like he'd only just realized the words had left his mouth. The shift in the group was instant. All of them turned to look at him. Not teasing now, not joking, just focused. Noah exhaled, rubbing a hand lightly at the back of his neck. I mean, he corrected quickly, trying to smooth it over. We had an argument 3 weeks ago and I moved out of our dorm. He's very protective. He doesn't mean any harm. A beat. He's sweet, Noah added, almost defensively now, as he needed them to understand the version of Tate in his head more than the version they were building from the outside. Like a teddy bear, we've been together for 14 years, he just doesn't like sleeping alone, that's all. Silence followed. Not dramatic, just heavy in a way that meant everyone was processing the same thing from different angles. Susie was the first to break it, but not with humor this time. You're telling me, she said slowly, carefully, that Tate Blue, the guy whose family basically has half of Princeton named after them, has been sleeping outside your dorm door, because he doesn't like sleeping alone. Jack let out a short laugh, but it didn't land as funny as he clearly intended. That sounds insane. Bree shook her head slightly. That's not normal, Noah. Andrew looked between them. Even if he's protective, that's a lot. Anna's expression was more cautious than anything else. Does he do that often, the sleeping outside your door thing? Noah hesitated. And that hesitation said more than any explanation could. Because the truth wasn't that it was unheard of. It was that it was familiar enough for him to normalize it. Susie leaned back slightly again, but the curiosity in her face had shifted into something more serious now. So he just waits outside your door, she asked, every night. Noah didn't answer right away. And in that silence, the idea everyone had been laughing around a minute ago stopped being funny entirely. Noah let out a short laugh, one that came out before he fully thought through what he was saying. Well, when we're not fighting, he said, and he's not trying to control my every move because of his overprotectiveness and insane jealousy. He paused mid-sentence, realization flickering across his face too late. He usually sleeps on top of me. Silence. Noah blinked, then quickly lifted a hand as he could physically take the words back. I mean, he likes to sleep beside me, not on top of me. That came out wrong. But Susie was already leaning forward, eyes lighting up as she'd just been handed the most entertaining piece of information imaginable. No, 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 she said immediately, cutting him off. Don't correct yourself. Noah groaned under his breath. Susie pointed at him, grinning. You're telling me that the richest boy in the state of Rhode Island right now sleeps on top of you. Jack choked on a laugh. Bree looked horrified and intrigued at the same time. Anna just slowly shook her head like she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of this conversation anymore. Susie meanwhile looked delighted. That is so sweet, she declared, completely unbothered. Then she nudged Noah's shoulder lightly. Are you two lovers, or are you both acting platonic in public and doing stuff behind the scenes? Noah froze again, caught between embarrassment and the sudden awareness that he'd said entirely too much. That's not, he started. But Susie didn't let him finish, still smiling like she was piecing together a puzzle only she found obvious. Noah spoke more steadily now, like once he started laying it out plainly, it was easier to keep going. Tate was an only child, he said, correcting himself gently, just like I was, and he was very lonely. I think I was too, in a different way. Susie's teasing faded into something quieter as she listened. He invited me home 3 days after we met, Noah continued. And I ended up staying over a lot. I actually lived there for most of my childhood. I slept in his bed most nights. A few of the others shifted slightly, but no one interrupted now. His parents, especially his mom, became like a second family to me. He has rich uncles and aunts but no cousins his age, so, Noah shrugged a little. I spent almost every night there growing up, only a few nights I wasn't there, like if there was bad weather or I was sick. His voice stayed calm, almost matter-of-fact, like this was just the shape his life had always taken. I grew up with the best of everything because of him, and Tate, he liked sharing it, that's just how he was. A pause. Then a little quieter. People thought it was weird, teachers too. We got bullied for how close we were in high school. That part landed differently. The room didn't react immediately this time. No jokes, no interruptions, just a kind of collective recalibration as they tried to place that version of closeness into what they already thought they knew. Susie wasn't smirking anymore. Jack looked thoughtful. Bree glanced down. And Anna's expression had softened into something more careful. Because whatever assumptions they'd been building about Tate Blue, about wealth, distance, and mystery, didn't account for that kind of history. Not years like that. Not a childhood built side by side. Andrew had been quiet for a while, watching Noah instead of reacting like the others. Finally he spoke, voice more direct than before. So you both lovers or friends? The question landed bluntly, cutting through the softer explanations Noah had been giving. Noah didn't even hesitate. None of the above, he said, then, after a beat like he wanted to be precise rather than evasive, we just like being together. A small shrug followed. But no, we're not friends or lovers, we've never done those things. Susie raised an eyebrow slightly at that, but didn't interrupt this time. Noah continued, a little more measured now, like he was organizing the explanation as he spoke it. Tate had a bad experience with friends when he was younger, he said, so he doesn't really do friends. He's very careful about who he lets in, and with his wealth it just makes things complicated. People want things from him. He paused, then added more casually, he's getting a business degree and he's doing a lot of other things too. I can't remember all of them. That last part came out almost like an afterthought, as Tate's life had always been something Noah observed rather than catalogued. Before anyone could fully respond, Anna suddenly perked up, the tension shifting in a completely different direction. When do we get to meet the sex god? She asked, eyes bright again. It's not fair that Susie already got to see him. Susie immediately looked offended. Excuse you, I did not gaze. I am absolutely gazing, Anna interrupted happily. Is he dating anyone? Please say no. She clasped her hands together dramatically, leaning forward like she was about to be granted a wish. The energy in the group shifted again, lighter, curious, almost theatrical, but Noah didn't immediately join in. Because even as they joked, the reality of what he'd just described still sat between them. Not friends, not lovers. Just something that had lasted long enough to confuse everyone who looked at it from the outside. Noah gave a small, almost resigned shrug. I agree, he said, as if that part of the conversation was at least easy to confirm. Tate is very attractive. Susie made a sound like she was about to interject again, but Noah kept going before she could derail it. But he hasn't dated, not really, he's never had a girlfriend. A pause. There was Emily, Noah added, thinking back, but that only lasted a few weeks, and honestly, I think it was more about trying to get my attention, make me jealous, something like that. Jack blinked. That's intense. Noah didn't argue the word. He doesn't date, Noah continued. He doesn't want long-term relationships. He told me a few days ago he's basically a condemned bachelor for life. Susie raised an eyebrow. That sounds dramatic. It is dramatic, Noah said simply. That's just how he talks sometimes. He shifted slightly where he stood, gaze dropping for a second before coming back up. He likes his space, he likes being alone. He's not really the family man type either, even though people assume he would be because of his family. A faint, almost thoughtful pause followed. But he's always been like that, Noah added. Even when we were younger, he doesn't really let people in, just me mostly. That last line hung a little longer than the others. Because in a room full of people who were only just learning the outline of Tate Blue from the outside, Noah had just casually described a lifetime exception. Over the next few days, the giggling and whispers only got worse. It wasn't subtle anymore. Girls would make exaggerated kissing noises when Noah walked past in the hallways, followed by bursts of laughter that didn't even try to hide themselves. Groups of guys watched him like he was suddenly a new kind of curiosity on campus, like some rumor had rewritten who he was overnight. Noah tried to ignore it, at first, then it just became part of the background noise he had to push through to get anywhere. By Thursday afternoon, a note from the Dean of Admissions was waiting for him. Noah didn't react outwardly, but he felt it immediately, that small, tight shift in his stomach that came whenever authority entered the picture without explanation. It was around 2 in the afternoon when he walked across campus toward the administration building. He had met the dean briefly before the term started. Noah had always been like that, noticed early by faculty, pulled into conversations with professors and administrators long before most students even figured out where their classes were. Being academically driven came with its own kind of visibility. He expected, realistically, that he would end up knowing most of the deans before Christmas simply by being that student who showed up everywhere prepared. Inside, the building was quieter. He pushed through the doors and found the dean's office door shut. A secretary sat in the waiting area. Miss Blush. She was typing steadily on a typewriter, each keystroke sharp and deliberate in the quiet room. She glanced up briefly when Noah entered, gave him a small, professional nod, then went back to her work without comment. Noah sat down in one of the chairs across from the office door. The waiting room was still, almost overly so compared to the energy outside campus. The soft clacking of the typewriter filled the space between him and whatever he was about to walk into. He leaned back slightly, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes fixed on the closed door. And for the first time that day, the noise of campus, the whispers, the looks, the rumors, finally faded just enough for him to notice something else underneath it. Something heavier. Something that felt like it had been building long before the dean ever called him in. Miss Blush looked up from her typewriter when Noah stood. "You can go in now." The door opened just a crack as she spoke, then widened. "Thank you," Noah said politely, stepping past her and into the office. Dean Xavier was behind his desk, as usual, composed, alert, and looking faintly too pleased for a conversation that involved disciplinary attention. "Come in, young man," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite him. "Take a seat." Noah sat posture straight, hands folding neatly in his lap. "Thank you for making time for me today," he said in a calm, professional tone. The dean flipped open a folder on his desk, glancing down at it. "I have your file in front of me," he said, "and I have to say I'm very impressed. Valedictorian of your high school class, strong extracurricular record, not much outside of academics but still a well-rounded academic achiever, an academic wizard one might say." Noah gave a small, polite nod, neither agreeing nor correcting. The dean leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. "Now," he continued, tone shifting just a bit, "the reason I've called you in is not because of your achievements. Our last meeting covered that thoroughly." He paused, taking a sip from his coffee mug as if this were all routine. I've received at least 1,000 calls and notes from faculty, alumni, and students in good standing regarding a dispute involving you and your former roommate, Mr. Tate Blue. Noah's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at the name. The dean continued unbothered. Normally, I do not get involved in students' domestic or personal disputes as long as they do not affect academic performance or violate conduct policy. Frankly, I couldn't care less. Another sip of coffee. We do not discriminate on this campus, especially, he added lightly, toward what I assume is a gay young man such as yourself. The words landed like a sudden drop. Noah's entire face flushed red almost instantly. I never said I was gay, he said quickly, too quickly, the composure slipping just enough to betray him. The dean blinked once, slowly lowering his mug. Then he tilted his head, studying Noah over the rim of his glasses. You may want to focus less on correcting that, he said mildly, and more on why half this campus believes your personal situation is now public discussion. He tapped the folder once. Mr. Blue seems to be at the center of it. The dean continued, tone shifting into something more formal now, carefully measured, like he was reading from a prepared statement. I also want to personally apologize to you on behalf of the academic administration of this college. Noah's posture stayed straight, but his attention sharpened. One of our student volunteers, the dean said, improperly distributed private information regarding your dorm assignment and residence details. A pause. That student has been dismissed from their position and formally reprimanded for clear ethical and policy violations. Noah's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I am sorry if Mr. Blue located your residence as a result of that breach, or if you experienced any form of harassment or disruption because of it, the dean continued. The seriousness of releasing student personal information cannot be overstated. He folded his hands again. We hope you will not hold this oversight against the administration. It will not be repeated. Another sip of coffee like punctuation. There is also the matter of Mr. Blue, he added. Noah's eyes flickered up at that, the only visible change in his expression. He was called into my office regarding repeated attempts to obtain private student information, addresses, schedules, residence details, the dean said evenly. He has been formally warned and disciplined in accordance with university policy. A brief pause followed, heavier than the words themselves. Let me be clear, the dean added, tone steady but firm. We do not tolerate that behavior from any student regardless of status or background. He looked at Noah directly now. However, he continued, given the circumstances reported by multiple sources, it is also clear that there is a significant personal entanglement between you and Mr. Blue that has begun to affect campus attention and student behavior. The implication hung there without being fully stated. Not an accusation. Not judgment. Just an institutional concern. And that, the dean said quietly, is what I would like to address next. The dean leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose as he had already had this conversation too many times before. I am very much aware, he began, that Mr. Blue is your. He paused, searching briefly for the right institutional phrasing, then settled on the word anyway. Lover. Noah's posture tightened immediately at that, but the dean didn't acknowledge the reaction. That was not the terminology Mr. Blue himself used, the dean continued, but it is the term most frequently used by faculty leadership and the student body when reporting a man who had no business being in dorm room 47 on the second floor, sleeping outside your door under, how shall I put this, rather unmistakable circumstances. He tapped a pen once against the desk, as if organizing his thoughts into something more tolerable. As I said in my previous remarks, I do not concern myself with domestic disputes or whatever romantic entanglements students choose to engage in. That is not my jurisdiction. My concern is the academic environment and campus order. He gestured lightly toward the folder in front of him. At this point, the issue is not emotional, it is procedural. The volume of reports, complaints, and inquiries I have received regarding the two of you has escalated to a level that is now interfering with normal campus function. A faint pause. I am receiving correspondence not because of misconduct in the traditional sense, but because students are distracted, gossip is spreading, lectures are being interrupted in conversation rather than for attendance. Administrative staff is being pulled into discussions that have nothing to do with academics. He gave a small restrained sigh. I do not care if you and Mr. Blue sleep on top of each other. Yes, that is a direct phrase used in multiple written statements, he added, almost clinically, but I do care that he is not assigned to reside in your dormitory and therefore cannot remain there past 10 p.m. The dean looked at Noah now more directly. Mr. Blue has been observed outside your room from approximately 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on repeated occasions. He flipped a page in the file. And before you assume this is being treated as a matter of hostility, let me clarify, Mr. Blue himself has stated he does not intend harm. He also stated he was attempting to apologize to you. A brief pause. Nevertheless, he has been formally reprimanded. The dean's tone stayed even, but there was a faint edge of fatigue now, like he was balancing policy against an increasingly absurd situation. I am also required to remind you, he continued, that regardless of emotional circumstances, no student is permitted to occupy or remain in residence areas to which they are not assigned. He leaned back again, folding his hands. I understand you may feel this is being framed unfairly. You may even feel that your personal situation is being scrutinized more than necessary. But I want to be very clear, this would be the same conversation if Mr. Blue were a young woman. A small pause. This is not about sexuality, relationships, or judgment. It is about unauthorized presence, repeated overnight occupancy, and disruption to campus order. Then a quieter final note. And Mr. Noah, I am going to say this plainly. Whatever occurred between you and Mr. Blue that resulted in this pattern of behavior, it must be resolved in a way that does not involve your dormitory hallway becoming a nightly residence. Mrs. Blush chose that exact moment to press the PA system, her voice cutting neatly through the office. Excuse me, sir, there are 12 calls waiting, complaints regarding Mr. Tate Blue and the dormitory attendance issue. The dean didn't even look toward the intercom. They'll have to wait, he said flatly. I'm speaking with one of the gentlemen involved. Hold my calls, please. Thank you, Miss Blush. A faint pause followed as the line went quiet again. The dean turned his attention back to Noah, expression resetting into something more composed. I spoke with Mr. Tate, he said. He explained the situation, that you were unaware he had been sleeping outside your door. Noah's eyes lifted slightly at that, but he didn't interrupt. He took full responsibility for the situation that led to you leaving your shared dorm assignment, the dean continued, and he confirmed that he was staying outside your room as a form of apology. A brief pause. All of this in isolation would be manageable, the dean said, except for the fact that Mr. Blue was present outside your residence after 10 p.m. He tapped the folder once. Mr. Blue has assured me it will not happen again. Given that this is a first offense and that no harm or harassment occurred, it will not be placed on his permanent record. He leaned back slightly. In situations like this, all students receive at least one warning if it is a minor infraction in the first semester. His gaze flicked briefly to Noah, more observational now than disciplinary. I will say, he added, given your academic record, I expected you to be at the center of something more conventional. The file we received from your high school indicated no disciplinary issues whatsoever, unless one counts being bullied. A short pause, then he waved it off lightly. Regardless, I consider this matter closed. Noah's shoulders loosened slightly, but only a little. And frankly, the dean continued, I hope I do not have to hear about it again. If you and Mr. Blue need to resolve personal matters, do so before 10 p.m. or off campus. He flipped the folder shut. Your neighbors prior to this incident have consistently reported you as a model student, so I will assume this is a misunderstanding of circumstance rather than conduct. Then, almost as an afterthought, Mr. Blue is also one of our academic high achievers. I am slightly surprised he chose Brown given his family's typical preferences, but we are pleased to have him. We do not discriminate based on wealth or status. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. If there is nothing further, he said, you are dismissed. Noah hesitated for only a moment, then stood as well. Thank you, he said politely. The dean gave a small nod. And Mr. Noah, if Mr. Blue contacts you again in a way that feels disruptive, or if he is outside your residence after hours, I want to be informed immediately. Noah nodded once. Then he left the office. Outside, the hallway felt strangely normal again, quiet, fluorescent lit, indifferent. He walked past Miss Blush, who didn't look up from her typewriter this time. And as he stepped out of the administration building, he ran a hand through his hair slowly, processing everything he'd just heard in fragments. Tate hadn't just been there. He'd been seen there. Reported. Explained. And apparently, sleeping outside his door every night had been going on long enough for it to become a campus policy discussion. Noah exhaled, still half in disbelief, and kept walking. The dean paused just as Noah reached the door. Off the record, he added, voice lowering slightly, as if shifting out of formal procedure and into something closer to personal observation. I find your admirer to be quite a delightful young man. Noah paused mid-step, hand still on the doorframe. You seem to be very lucky, the dean continued, almost mildly amused. Just keep your domestic and romantic disputes out of the public eye. A tired exhale followed, like he'd been carrying the administrative weight of the entire situation for weeks. If you don't mind, he added, I've had to answer 487 calls from students about this issue. 487. In that time, I could have been focusing on matters that actually require institutional attention. He gave a small, resigned shake of his head. As you know, every report, phone or in person, is taken seriously, and there will be a file documenting this incident. A pause. I am sorry that it happened. Then, as if remembering something more pleasant, his tone lifted slightly. We are holding an academic conference, well, more of a reception for high-performing students the day after tomorrow, Economics Building, 2 o'clock. He looked at Noah over the rim of his glasses. You are invited. A beat. However, he added a little more firmly, please do not bring Mr. Blue, we do not require additional gossip fuel. He adjusted a stack of papers on his desk, signaling the conversation was done. Have a good day, young man. Noah stepped out into the hallway again. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment he just stood there, the dean's words echoing in a strangely surreal loop. 487 calls. Admire is delightful, don't bring Mr. Blue. Then he exhaled, ran a hand through his hair and started walking back across campus, the noise of student life already creeping back in around him. I arrived about 10 minutes after 7. The rain had started on the way back, light at first, then steady enough that the pavement turned slick under my bicycle tires. By the time I locked it outside the dorm, my jacket was damp at the shoulders and my hair clung slightly at my forehead. I took the stairs 2 at a time. For some reason, I expected Tate to already be inside, sitting on my bed as he used to when things were simpler, like he still belonged in the space before I even opened the door. But when I reached my floor, he wasn't inside. He was standing just outside my door instead. Still waiting. Like he hadn't moved much since he arrived. The hallway lights softened the edges of him, black hair slightly damp from the weather, posture quiet but alert in that familiar way he had when he was trying to stay composed. Seeing him there did something sharp and immediate in my chest, something that mixed familiarity with unease. I unlocked the door and stepped aside. Tate, I said quietly, come in. He followed without hesitation. The room was empty in a way I'd gotten used to but still didn't fully like. It was technically mine alone now. The student who had originally been assigned here had left suddenly to help his mother after a cancer diagnosis, and I'd ended up here by myself, too much space for one person, too little noise to feel lived in. Tate paused just inside, taking it in like he always did. Then I shut the door behind him. Do you want some coffee? I asked automatically, already moving toward the small setup I kept on my desk. It's late, but I have decaf. He shook his head slightly, softening a little. No, he said, but hot cocoa sounds better. That made me glance back at him. A small smile had already formed on his face, faint, familiar, almost careful. Yeah, I said. He nodded once. So I made 2 cups. The room filled with the quiet sound of water heating, mugs being set down, the small, normal rhythms that always felt a little strange when we weren't speaking directly about whatever was actually going on between us. When I finally sat across from him, I told him what had happened. The dean, the calls, the reports, the dorm hallway situation is being turned into something official instead of just ours. Tate listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he lowered his gaze for a moment. Then he exhaled. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Not defensive, not elaborate. Just that. A month had passed since everything had first spilled out into the open. The campus noise hadn't fully gone away, but it had dulled, less like a storm now, more like a distant current you could hear if you listened too closely. Noah had learned how to walk through it without reacting every time someone looked at him a second too long. And Tate had become something harder to define in that time, not absent, not present in the old way either, just somewhere in between, like a familiar gravity neither of them had fully stepped away from. That evening, Noah stood in the dorm room with a folded piece of paper in his hand. He didn't sit right away. "I've decided something," he said finally, voice steady but careful. "We should go back to being friends, not just strangers passing in the hallway." A pause. "We have too much history, too many memories. It doesn't make sense for us to act like we don't know each other anymore." Tate didn't interrupt. Noah exhaled slowly, as if making sure he didn't rush through what came next. "I'm moving back into the dorm we shared," he said, "but I have some rules I need us to agree on." He lifted the paper slightly, not quite presenting it yet but making its presence clear. "I want boundaries," Noah continued. "I think it'll be healthier for both of us so we understand what's expected instead of whatever this has been lately." A brief silence settled between them. Then Noah added more evenly now. "I've written them down, expectations, boundaries, everything I think needs to be clear." He finally looked at Tate directly. "You can add your own too," he said, "if they fit, if they don't contradict what I've already written." There was no accusation in his tone, no challenge. Just structure. A way to make something overwhelming feel manageable again. Tate reached for the paper and Noah let him take it. As Tate read, Noah stayed quiet, watching only long enough to make sure he wasn't interrupted, then letting the silence do what it needed to do while the idea of friends settled between them in a new, unfamiliar shape. Noah made it very clear before the discussion ended that the structure wasn't flexible in the way emotions sometimes were. Anything that drifted beyond strictly platonic behavior was off the table. Not as a suggestion, not as something negotiable in the moment, but as a firm line that defined what this new arrangement actually was. Jealousy, fear of abandonment, and emotional reactions weren't forbidden, but they had to exist in a way that made sense within a normal friendship. Nothing exaggerated, nothing possessive, nothing that turned distance into punishment or closeness into obligation. Tate didn't get to own Noah's attention. Not in practice, not in expectation, not in assumption, and he couldn't expect to be prioritized over other people in Noah's life. He wasn't the center of it anymore, he was part of it like everyone else. Noah chose to keep close. Noah had other friends now and that mattered. Tate would need to adjust to that without interfering, without intimidation, and without letting discomfort turn into control. If Noah spent time with others, it couldn't be met with withdrawal or passive punishment. That pattern wasn't going to continue. At the same time, Tate had boundaries too, real ones, acknowledged and respected. But those boundaries weren't tools for control either. They were there so both of them could exist in the same space without either person feeling like they were being erased or overwhelmed. Neither of them was required to be constantly available, not emotionally, not physically, not socially. There was no expectation of 24/7 access anymore. Instead, the agreement was built around something more structured: communication, honesty, and accountability. If something felt wrong, it had to be said directly. If something needed to change, it had to be discussed rather than acted out. Silence couldn't be used as punishment, and resentment couldn't be allowed to build without being addressed. Every week they could revisit it, adjust it, refine it, treat it like something living rather than fixed. And underneath all of it was the clearest boundary of all. Noah wasn't going to absorb emotional volatility anymore just to keep things stable. If something needed to be worked through, it would be worked through openly, not carried quietly until it fractured into distance or control. Tate listened, and this time there was no confusion about where the lines were. It wasn't about distance. It was about how they were allowed to exist near each other without repeating what had already broken them. Noah made the consequences of the agreement unambiguous. If either of them crossed a boundary, it wasn't something that would be ignored or quietly absorbed anymore. The first time would be addressed directly, no avoidance. No delay. The second time carried real consequences: reduced contact, loss of access to shared space, and a step back in whatever Noah and Tate had become. Not as punishment but as structure, something that kept things from slipping into old patterns. He also told Tate he'd already spoken to his friends about the new boundaries, not in a way that made Tate a subject of gossip, but in a way that made expectations clear, so they could also hold both of them accountable if things started drifting again. That part mattered more than Noah said out loud. Because it meant this wasn't just between them anymore, it had an external balance now, perspective. That was when Mark came up. Tate's reaction was immediate, subtle but sharp. A tightening in posture, a shift in attention that made the room feel smaller without anything actually changing. Noah noticed it, of course, he always did. He asked him to explain it. Not accusingly, just directly. Why did Mark specifically cause that response, what it was that made him feel that level of discomfort? Tate didn't try to hide it or soften it into something vague. He spoke plainly in his own way about feeling threatened, about discomfort that came from proximity, attention, and something that didn't sit right with him even when he tried to rationalize it. There was a heaviness underneath it, a kind of hypervigilance that didn't fully need words to be understood. Noah suspected some of it came from Tate's assumptions about Mark's orientation or intentions, but he didn't interrupt or correct him midstream. He let Tate finish. When he did, Noah responded with equal clarity. Tate was allowed to feel what he felt, he was allowed to voice discomfort, he was allowed to name what unsettled him without being dismissed. But that didn't translate into control. Noah was an adult and his friendships weren't negotiable territory. As long as he wasn't deliberately trying to provoke or hurt Tate, he wouldn't be cutting people out of his life based on discomfort alone. That included Mark. Tate would have to tolerate the fact that Mark existed in Noah's world as a friend, just as Noah would continue being mindful not to weaponize that friendship or use it carelessly in ways that caused unnecessary strain. In return, Noah did agree to boundaries around how he interacted with Mark in Tate's presence, small, practical adjustments meant to prevent unnecessary tension rather than avoid the friendship altogether. It wasn't about removing people. It was about preventing them from becoming weapons in a system that depended on trust to function at all. And for once, even with disagreement present, neither of them turned it into silence. Tate's reaction came fast, first the pout, immediate and unfiltered, like the answer hadn't matched what he wanted to hear. "So you're not going to stop being friends with Mark," he said again, quieter this time, as if repetition might change the outcome. Noah didn't flinch. "No," he said simply. Tate's eyes narrowed slightly, then he asked it outright. "Do you love him more than me?" The question hung there in a way that made the room feel smaller than it was. Noah exhaled steady. "I really enjoy Mark's friendship," he said honestly. "He's kind, I like him." A pause. "But you're the one I choose to sleep next to at night." That landed differently. Tate's expression shifted almost immediately, tension easing out of his shoulders, replaced by something quieter, more self-assured. A smirk started before he could stop it. Like he'd just secured something. His gaze flicked away for a second, then back, pleased in a way he didn't bother hiding fully. Mark could be a friend, that was fine. But only he got that place at the end of the day, the space that mattered most to him. Noah noticed the look instantly. Of course he did. "Stop smiling like that," Noah said, more amused than sharp now, watching him carefully. Tate's smirk lingered. Noah shook his head slightly, letting out a short laugh despite himself. Or you're going to lose the privilege of sleeping next to me, he added. That did it. The smugness cracked just enough around the edges to show Tate was actually listening now, even if he still looked pleased with himself underneath it. No one around them seemed to notice the shift at first. To everyone else, things looked settled, cleaner, defined. Noah and Tate weren't tangled in the same confusion they'd been before, and Noah's friendships had expanded into something more normal, more visible, more balanced. But Tate noticed everything, and in his own way, he adjusted to it. It started subtly, closer proximity when they were walking together across campus, a hand resting a little longer at Noah's sleeve, standing nearer than necessary in conversations that included other people. Nothing that crossed the agreed lines, nothing openly disruptive, but enough that the pattern changed. The equality Noah had insisted on with his other friendships didn't make Tate feel reassured in the way Noah intended. Instead, it left space where exclusivity used to exist, space Tate didn't know how to fill comfortably. Sleeping next to Noah at night had been the anchor before. Now that it was no longer framed as something automatic or defining, it stopped feeling like enough on its own. It wasn't possession, not exactly, but it was uncertainty reshaped into behavior. And uncertainty, for Tate, tended to show itself physically first. Noah noticed the increase in contact. He always did. The small recalibrations. The way Tate would drift closer when he felt displaced or stay near a little longer after conversations ended, like distance itself had become harder to tolerate. There were growing pains in those first few weeks. Mostly on Tate's side. Not because the structure was unclear, but because it was new. Because equal footing didn't feel the same as secure placement in his internal understanding of relationships. Being one among several people in Noah's life didn't erase the instinct to seek confirmation that he still mattered in a specific way. Noah didn't punish it, but he didn't ignore it either. He corrected it when needed, gently but consistently, reminding Tate, through tone, through pauses, through clear responses, that closeness didn't require escalation and reassurance didn't have to become intensity. And slowly, unevenly, the pattern began to settle. Not perfectly, but enough that it stopped spilling outward into everything around them. Enough that what remained was something they could actually live inside, rather than constantly renegotiate in real time. Noah noticed the change quickly. Tate had always been physical in a quiet, habitual way, close enough to feel present but not constantly seeking reassurance through contact. That shifted after the boundaries with everyone else became more balanced. Now the physical closeness has increased in small, frequent ways, not disruptive, not public enough to draw attention in a clear way, but noticeable to Noah in the way patterns always were. A hand lingering a little longer on his sleeve, standing closer in shared spaces, sitting nearer without needing an obvious reason. It wasn't framed as possession, it wasn't framed as control. But it was reactive. The adjustment to being one among several in Noah's life didn't sit easily with Tate. Sleeping in the same space didn't feel like enough reassurance on its own anymore because it wasn't exclusive. It didn't separate him from the rest of Noah's relationships the way he was used to feeling separated. That insecurity showed up in behavior before it ever showed up in words. Then came the phone calls. It started subtly, Tate answering the dorm phone when it rang in the evenings, only to recognize Mark's voice on the line and hang up immediately. No explanation, no message passed on, just a quiet disconnect as if the call hadn't happened at all. The first time Noah found out, it was accidental, a missed conversation that didn't make sense, a gap where something should have been. The second time he asked, and the pattern became clear. Noah didn't escalate it emotionally, he didn't accuse or interpret intent beyond what was observable. He simply named the behavior for what it was: interference. The boundary he set was direct. Tate could not block or redirect calls. He could not end conversations that weren't his to end. He could not forget messages, withhold information, or claim calls hadn't happened when they had. No selective filtering. No gatekeeping communication. If someone reached out to Noah, that connection had to remain intact regardless of discomfort, jealousy, or uncertainty on Tate's side. It wasn't framed as punishment, it wasn't even framed as a correction. It was maintenance. A rule designed to protect access, not restrict it. Tate heard it without interrupting, even if it clearly landed in a place that made him uncomfortable. Because of all the adjustments he was still doing internally, this boundary was one of the clearest lines Noah had drawn yet. Other relationships weren't negotiable, and communication wasn't something Tate could quietly shape anymore. And for the first time in a while, the structure between them didn't shift after the conversation ended. It simply stayed where it was set. No one really clocked the full pattern from the outside. To everyone else, Tate just seemed more physically present with Noah lately. A little more attached in small, habitual ways. Nothing alarming on its own and easy enough to read as an adjustment to the new balance Noah had insisted on, where Tate wasn't positioned above Noah's other relationships anymore, just alongside them. And in a sense, that balance worked exactly as intended. Tate didn't react to Susie, Anna, Bree, Jack, Andrew, or anyone else Noah spent time with. There was no visible jealousy there, no tension, no attempts to interfere. He could sit in the same room as them, exist in the same conversations, and remain steady. But Mark was different. That difference didn't show up as logic or argument, it showed up as behavior. Whenever Mark called the dorm, the shift was immediate. It didn't matter who picked up the phone. Once Tate recognized the voice on the other end, something in his posture changed. He'd hover nearby, listening without meaning to, attention fixed in a way that was sharper than usual. 2 minutes into Noah's conversation, it would start. A foot tapping, then a heavier stomp. Not subtle, not hidden, more like a signal he couldn't quite regulate in real time. A physical interruption to express something he wasn't fully verbalizing in the moment. End it, pay attention to me, this is too much. Sometimes Noah would acknowledge it without fully complying, redirecting him instead, telling him to sit down or to step outside or to focus on something else while he finished the call. Other times, depending on what the conversation was about, he would keep it going and simply not engage the signal at all. And Tate would react in the only way he seemed to default to when overwhelmed by it. Impatience, frustration, a kind of childish escalation that didn't match his otherwise controlled behavior with everyone else. It wasn't jealousy in the broad sense. It was specific, focused, almost disproportionate to the situation itself, which made it more noticeable, not less. Noah saw the pattern clearly. This wasn't about Mark as a person in general. It was about what Mark represented in that moment, attention Noah could give elsewhere, attention that didn't automatically return to Tate, and attention that Tate couldn't interrupt without being told not to. And the more consistently Noah held the boundary, the more Tate was forced to sit inside that discomfort without being able to redirect it outward. Which meant the behavior didn't disappear. It just became more obvious when it surfaced. The worst moment happened on an ordinary evening. Mark had called again. Noah was already mid-conversation when Tate came back into the room. The door clicked shut behind him and he paused for half a second when he saw Noah smiling, actually laughing, into the receiver like the conversation was easy, natural, uninterrupted. Something in Tate's expression shifted immediately. He crossed the room without a word and wrapped his arms around Noah from behind. Noah didn't startle, didn't freeze. He simply adjusted slightly to make room for the weight of it, still talking, still smiling, still fully engaged in the call. That calm reaction, so unbothered by Tate's presence, was what tipped the moment from uncomfortable into volatile. Tate tried again. He reached for the phone. Noah reacted immediately this time, not sharply, not angrily, but firmly, tapping Tate's hand away from the receiver with a controlled, almost absent-minded correction, like redirecting someone who was interrupting a task. Tate, he said lightly, still mid-laugh, don't. But he didn't stop the call. That was the part that didn't land well. Tate tried again to pull him back, to physically redirect his attention away from the conversation, but Noah just kept speaking, laughing at something Mark had said on the other end, fully absorbed in the moment. To Noah, it was harmless multitasking. To Tate, it didn't register as sharing, it registered as replacement. When physical interference didn't work, Tate escalated into the only other signal he seemed to use in moments like this. He stomped his foot. Once. Then again. Then it became rhythmic, frustrated, repetitive, growing in intensity the longer the call continued. Noah glanced down once, still smiling faintly, and said something like, "Hold on," into the phone but didn't fully disengage. The stomping continued. For a full stretch of minutes it filled the room, Tate standing there, clearly agitated now, trying to pull Noah's attention away from something he couldn't interrupt. Eventually, Noah let out a small breath of laughter again, more at the situation than the call, and finally wrapped it up. "Yeah, I've gotta go," he said into the phone, still calm. "I'll talk to you later." He hung up. The silence that followed was immediate. Tate stood there, arms tight at his sides, jaw set, still visibly scowling. Noah set the receiver down slowly and turned slightly toward him. Not angry. Not alarmed. Just aware. "You done?" he asked, almost mildly, like he was asking if a storm had passed or was still deciding to linger. The worst moments of Tate's childish tantrums happened when Mark would call Noah in the middle of the night from some airport or remote location during the older man's travels. Noah would immediately apologize to Tate, but he would continue to talk to Mark for up to 15 minutes on the phone. During one of the conversations, Tate started humming the Twisted Nerve theme by Bernard Herrmann. In a menacing tone, he then began stomping his foot. Tate felt replaced, and when Noah didn't notice him or hang up, Tate would pick up some textbook, storm out of the dorm as the door slammed. Tate sat on the edge of the narrow dorm bed, legs drawn up, staring at the glowing phone screen in Noah's hand. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Mark's name lit up again, the ringtone cutting through the dark. Noah answered fast, voice low and apologetic. "Hey, sorry, I know it's late." He glanced at Tate with a quick, guilty look, then turned his attention back to the call. "Yeah, I'm still up. How's the layover?" Tate's jaw tightened. He watched Noah settle back against the pillows, already settling into the conversation like Tate wasn't even there. The first few notes slipped out of Tate's mouth, soft, eerie, the opening of the Twisted Nerve theme. He hummed it slowly and deliberately, the melody hanging in the air between them. Noah kept talking, voice calm, asking about Mark's flight times. Tate hummed louder, the notes turning sharper, more insistent. His foot started tapping against the floor, then stomping in rhythm with the tune. Each stomp landed heavy, the sound echoing off the dorm walls. Noah didn't look over. He laughed at something Mark said, the sound light and easy. Tate's humming grew darker, the melody twisting into something threatening. He stomped harder, the beat matching the rising tension in his chest. The childish rhythm filled the room, stomp, 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 while the Twisted Nerve theme looped again and again from his lips. Noah kept apologizing into the phone but stayed on the line, voice steady, as he answered another question about his classes. Tate's face flushed hot. He felt completely replaced, the older man's attention locked on the distant voice instead of the person sitting right beside him. The humming never stopped, but it grew louder, more aggressive, the stomping turning frantic. Tate's bare foot slammed down again and again, the sound punctuating every note. Noah still didn't hang up. He murmured something about missing the next call because of time zones, and Tate's chest tightened further. After nearly 10 minutes of the same pattern, Tate reached for the nearest textbook on the desk. He grabbed it hard, knuckles white. The humming continued one last time, low and menacing, before he stood up. The stomping stopped. He stormed across the room, textbook clutched to his chest, and yanked the door open. It slammed behind him with a loud crack that rattled the frame. The hallway swallowed the sound of his footsteps as he left, the Twisted Nerve melody still echoing faintly in his head. After one particularly childish outburst, Tate ended up sleeping in his own bed that night. Noah didn't force it, and he didn't chase the argument either. He simply let the space exist the way it needed to, respecting that whatever Tate was feeling had crossed into overload rather than conversation. Some things in Noah's mind couldn't be resolved in the middle of escalation. He understood the adjustment, at least in theory. 14 years of being the central constant in someone's life didn't just fade cleanly into one of many. Even if the structure was healthier now, even if the boundaries made sense, the emotional rebalancing still had weight to it. Tate, on the other hand, didn't experience it as theory. He experienced it as an absence. As the absence of something that used to be automatic, attention that didn't have to be earned or shared or scheduled. Now Noah had friends, plans, conversations that didn't automatically include him, a life that moved even when Tate wasn't directly inside it. And while Tate didn't resent the friends themselves, it was harder for him to sit with the fact that his role had changed. Not removed. Just no longer singular. That shift showed up in small ways. He'd linger in the room longer than necessary when Noah was getting ready to leave. He'd go quiet when Noah mentioned plans with others, not objecting, just processing it in real time. And sometimes, when the distance felt too immediate, he'd do something simple and repetitive, like a foot tapping against the floor, less as a statement and more as a signal he didn't have a clearer way to express. Not anger at others. Not rejection of Noah's friends. Just a need for attention that no longer came automatically the way it once had. Noah noticed the pattern as he always did. And while he didn't undo the boundaries he'd set, he also didn't misread the emotion underneath them. Tate wasn't trying to control the situation. He was struggling with not being the default center of it anymore. So the adjustment continued the way these things usually do, unevenly, quietly, without clean resolution. Some nights were better than others. And Tate was still learning how to exist in a version of closeness that didn't revolve entirely around being chosen first. 1 month after Tay and Noah had negotiated their boundaries and discussed a healthier relationship dynamic, Noah woke up slowly at first, half pulled out of a dream he couldn't quite hold onto, that soft disorientation that comes before the room fully resolves itself. It was around 4 in the morning. Dark outside, quiet inside. At first, there was nothing unusual about it, just the steady stillness of the dorm, the faint hum of heating, the kind of silence that usually meant everything was fine. Then he heard it. A small broken sound from across the room. Sniffling. Noah didn't move immediately. He stayed still, listening a little longer, letting his mind fully catch up before reacting. It wasn't the kind of noise that belonged to sleep. It came in uneven intervals, like someone trying and failing to contain it. Another breath, slightly shaky. Then again, quieter this time, but unmistakably emotional. Noah turned his head toward the other bed. Tate was there. Not asleep. Curled slightly on his side, facing away at first, shoulders drawn in tighter than usual. The stillness around him wasn't restful, it was contained, like he was holding himself together rather than letting go into sleep. Noah sat up slowly, careful not to startle him. Tate, he said, voice low and steady in the dark. No response. Only another soft sniffle, followed by a pause that felt like restraint more than rest. Noah shifted fully now, watching him a moment longer. In the dim light, Tate didn't look angry, didn't look like he was in the middle of any of the louder reactions they'd worked through before. He just looked overwhelmed. Like something had built up quietly and finally spilled over when there was nothing left to push it down with. Noah's voice stayed calm. What's going on? That got a small reaction. Tate tensed slightly, like he'd been caught in something private. He didn't turn right away, and when he did, it was slow and careful, like he was trying to minimize what was already obvious. His face was wet in a way he wasn't trying to hide anymore, but also wasn't fully willing to acknowledge out loud. The kind of crying that wasn't loud or dramatic, just persistent, like it had been happening longer than he wanted it to. Noah didn't interrupt. He just looked at him. And in that quiet space, it was easier for everything underneath the surface to show itself without needing words first. Because what Tate had been carrying for the past month wasn't just an adjustment, it was displacement. Not from Noah entirely, but from the role he used to occupy without question. There had been a time when Noah's attention wasn't divided, when plans didn't include negotiation, when proximity was assumed rather than scheduled. Tate had lived in that structure for years without thinking about it as something that could change. No, it had. And even though nothing about Noah's behavior was cruel or dismissive, even though the boundaries were clear and consistent, Tate's internal experience didn't track it as neutrality. It tracked it as a loss. Not of Noah himself, but of exclusivity, of automatic priority, being the first point of reference in every decision. And that loss didn't show up as anger anymore in this moment. It showed up as quiet jealousy that had nowhere to go. Jealousy is not directed at one person specifically, but at everything that took space in Noah's life without needing permission. Friends, calls, plans, even silence that wasn't shared. Especially Mark in the background of it all, someone who didn't have to ask for time the way Tate felt like he did now. Someone who could call, speak, laugh, and exist in Noah's attention without the same internal resistance Tate felt building in himself every time. It wasn't rational in the adult sense, but it was consistent in the emotional one. Tate swallowed, still not fully meeting Noah's eyes, like looking directly at him would make it more real than he could manage. Noah stayed sitting up now, fully awake, just watching him without pressure. Not moving to fix it yet. just present, waiting for what came next. There was a kind of irony in it that would have sounded almost absurd if anyone outside the room could see it clearly. The sex god reputation Tate carried around campus, the looks, the whispers, the way people reacted when he walked past, didn't translate into anything useful here. None of that helped him in the quiet of a dorm room at 4 in the morning, where the only thing that mattered was whether Noah's attention felt present or divided. And right now it felt divided. That was the core of it. Not rejection in any obvious sense, not abandonment in any literal sense, but something subtler and harder for Tate to name without it turning into something messy inside him. Noah had always been his constant, the person who didn't require competition, effort, or negotiation. The person whose attention had been automatic for as long as Tate could remember, structured around him without either of them ever having to define it. So when that structure changed, it didn't just feel like an adjustment. It felt like subtraction. Like something fundamental had been taken away and replaced with rules instead of instinct. Now there were boundaries. Now there were friends. Now there were calls that didn't end when Tate wanted them to, conversations that didn't revolve around his presence, moments where Noah laughed at something someone else said without immediately pulling him into it. Even if none of it was malicious, even if it was healthy by every external standard, Tate didn't experience it that way emotionally. He experienced it as distance forming where there used to be automatic closeness. And in the dark, that feeling didn't stay abstract. It condensed. Back in the room, Noah was still across the space when Tate finally pulled the covers over his head. It wasn't dramatic in the way outsiders might assume. There was no outburst, no shouting, no visible escalation anymore. Just a quiet withdrawal, fabric rising like a barrier between himself and everything that felt too exposed. A signal without words. Leave me alone. Or maybe more accurately, I don't know how to be in this moment without making it worse. Noah didn't move immediately. He stayed where he was, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the shape under the blanket settle into itself. He wasn't surprised by the reaction anymore. He'd seen enough of these moments now to recognize that they weren't about anger in the traditional sense. They were about to overload. About Tate hitting the limit of what he could interpret without feeling replaced. Because underneath all of it, beneath the reputation, the confidence, the way people saw him on campus, there was still the same emotional logic he'd carried for years. If Noah wasn't fully focused on him, then something had changed. And if something had changed, then the fear followed quickly behind it. What if I'm not enough anymore? Tate didn't say it out loud. But it sat in the room anyway. Noah stayed there, not rushing to fix it, not pulling the blanket away, just existing at a careful distance that didn't escalate anything further. The phone rang again just as the room had settled into that heavy, uneven silence. The sound cut through it sharply, unexpected, insistent. Tate didn't move at first. He was still under the covers, face hidden, breathing unevenly in that way that suggested he was trying not to fully fall apart in front of anything else. Then, after a moment, he reached for the phone without looking. "Hello," he said into the fabric-dulled darkness, voice flat with fatigue. There was a pause on the other end, unclear words, maybe a voice he recognized instantly. Something in his posture shifted. Noah, watching from across the room, could tell only from the change in stillness that it wasn't neutral. Tate's voice went colder. "I'm sorry," he said, clipped. "He doesn't live in LA anymore. Lose this number, don't call back." And then, without waiting for a response, he ended the call. The room went quiet again, but only for a second. Because the next sound was sharper. Tate threw the phone. It hit the wall with a dull, ugly impact before dropping somewhere out of sight, the sound echoing more than the action itself. Noah didn't react immediately in a dramatic way. He just looked at the space where it had landed, then back at the bundled shape in the bed. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Noah knew the caller had been one of Tate's female lovers from LA. Then he exhaled slowly. "Tate," he said, calm but firmer now, "don't throw things." No accusation, just a boundary being stated in real time. He stood up and walked a few steps, retrieving the phone from where it had fallen. He checked it once, screen cracked but still functioning, then set it carefully on the desk instead of handing it back. The energy in the room had changed again, but not into resolution, into the aftermath. Under the covers, Tate hadn't emerged. If anything, he looked smaller now, curled tighter into himself, like the outburst hadn't released anything so much as collapsed inward. Noah stayed where he was, not approaching the bed again. Not leaving either. Just steady in the middle distance. "You don't have to take calls like that," he said after a moment quieter, "but you also can't destroy things when you're upset." A pause. Then more softly, but still clear. "We're not doing escalation anymore, not like that." The silence that followed wasn't clean. But it was contained. Which for them was the only place anything new could actually start to form. The next day at 6 o'clock after the lights went off was when Tate usually got home. That meant there was about a 90% chance he'd pick up the phone. My heart thumped at the thought. The calls, the code, the little signals, they weren't just about talking to Mark. They were a lifeline, a boundary, a quiet rebellion all rolled into one. Each ring, each conversation after 6 would be a subtle but unmistakable reminder to Tate, "I'm not waiting for you, I belong somewhere else for a little while. My body, my attention, my time, they weren't his to control." It was exactly what the doctor had ordered, though not in the way anyone else would understand. The calls were therapy, strategy, and reassurance all at once. And as I stared at the clock ticking towards 6, I realized it wasn't just about escaping Tate's world. It was about carving out my own, one small signal at a time. The phone ringing, Mark's voice coming through, it would be my shield and my rebellion all in one. For most of their lives, Noah had been the one standing in the dark. Tate had always known more about the world, more about the people around them, more about the hidden reasons their lives had unfolded the way they had. Tate carried secrets the way other people carried wallets, always close, always guarded, always out of Noah's reach. And because of that, the balance between them had never been equal. Noah loved more openly, trusted more easily, asked questions that Tate rarely answered. Even when Tate was kind, even when he was protective or affectionate in his strange, complicated way, there was always a quiet imbalance underneath it all. Tate held the map. Noah was simply walking the path, but Mark's presence shifted something fundamental. Not because Mark had replaced Tate, he hadn't, not even close. Tate was still the gravitational center of Noah's emotional world, whether Noah liked admitting it or not. What changed was power. For the first time, Noah had information Tate didn't. He had a relationship that Tate couldn't fully see into. Conversations that happened outside Tate's reach. Parts of his life that weren't organized around Tate's reactions or rules. That alone changed the board. Mark gave Noah something he had never really had before: perspective, space. A way to step slightly outside the tight orbit of Tate's influence and see their relationship more clearly, and with that space came autonomy. Tate no longer knew everything about Noah's life. He couldn't predict every move, couldn't read every emotion the way he once had. There were gaps now, small blind spots where Noah existed independently. For the first time, the scales felt closer to balanced, maybe even slightly tilted in Noah's favor. And Noah realized something else, something he hadn't fully admitted to himself before the ambiguity worked for him. Tate believed what he wanted to believe. If Tate thought Mark was more important than he really was, Noah didn't rush to correct him. If Tate assumed things about Noah's feelings or his identity, Noah simply let the assumptions sit there unanswered. Part of that came from fear. Because the truth, saying the words out loud, telling Tate plainly that he was gay, felt like lighting a match near something fragile and volatile. Their entire relationship had been built on careful, unspoken boundaries. Noah had no idea what would happen if he crossed that final line. Would Tate pull away? Would he panic? Would everything they had collapse under the weight of honesty? Noah didn't know, and until he knew, the ambiguity protected him. Using Mark as a kind of shield allowed Noah to exist without explaining himself. Tate's jealousy and assumptions created a strange sort of cover. As long as Tate believed Mark represented some kind of romantic threat, Noah never had to define anything clearly. He could simply live. He could talk to Mark openly, without pretending to be straight, without hiding parts of himself behind awkward silences. He didn't have to build walls in those conversations. He didn't have to perform. With Tate, everything was complicated. With Mark, everything was clear. And that difference gave Noah something he had never truly had before: agency. For years, he had moved carefully through Tate's world, trying not to disrupt the delicate balance that kept them together. Now, for the first time, he had leverage even if Tate didn't realize it. The irony was almost poetic. Tate had spent years controlling the narrative between them. Now Noah simply allowed uncertainty to exist, and in that uncertainty he found freedom. Karma had finally arrived in Tate's life and it wrapped itself around Noah's shoulders. For years, Tate had taken Noah for granted in ways he barely even recognized. Noah had always been there, steady, loyal, orbiting him with the quiet certainty of someone who wasn't going anywhere. Tate had grown used to that permanence. It had become the background truth of his life, like gravity or the sunrise. Noah would always be there, until suddenly he wasn't quite so predictable anymore. Mark changed that. Mark was Tate's karma for assuming Noah had no other options, for believing Noah's devotion meant he would always wait patiently for whatever scraps of attention Tate decided to offer. Mark was living proof that Noah existed in a larger world, a world full of people who saw him, who wanted him, who valued him without hesitation. And Tate knew it. That was the worst part. Tate knew Mark wanted Noah. Whether Tate admitted it out loud or not, he could see it in the way Mark looked at him, in the quiet confidence Mark carried whenever Noah's name came up. Mark didn't hide his interest. He didn't tiptoe around Tate's feelings or pretend he wasn't a factor. Mark simply existed, and that existence drove Tate insane. Because the one thing Tate couldn't know, could never be certain about, was how far that interest would go. He didn't know if Mark would eventually convince Noah to sleep with him. He didn't know if Mark's presence would slowly shift Noah's loyalty over time. He didn't know if one day Noah might wake up and realize there were easier, healthier relationships in the world than the complicated one he shared with Tate. The uncertainty gnawed at him, and Noah realized something quietly powerful. Tate's imagination was doing half the work for him. The love Tate imagined Noah had for Mark, whether it existed or not, gave Noah something he had never possessed before: a head start. Power. For once, Tate wasn't the one controlling the emotional landscape between them. For once, Tate was the one reacting, second-guessing, watching for signs he couldn't fully interpret, and Noah could feel the shift. It wasn't about hurting Tate, it was about balance. For the first time, Noah felt like he had the space to become someone outside the version of himself that had always existed in Tate's shadow. If Tate believed Mark represented a different path for Noah, someone more confident, more independent, more self-directed, then maybe Noah could lean into that perception. Maybe it was time to change things. The thought settled into his mind slowly, but once it appeared, it wouldn't leave. His hair, his clothes, his words, the small details that shaped how the world saw him. Mark carried himself differently from the boys Noah had grown up around.